people get afraid of staying stuck in grief. I get afraid of staying stuck in grief. You can't get stuck in grief. Not really, if you're just allowing it to exist, because the process will run. The emotions will move through and they'll process in your body. If you're not using shame and should be and shouldn't be to try to modulate things, it will process and you will release it and you will not get stuck in it and it will not get stuck in you.
Welcome to the Feminine Alchemy Podcast, where we explore the truth about the feminine, the peaceful, the wild, and the visceral. I'm your host, Jaye, joined by my co-hosts, Julie Dean Richards and Kaylee Rose. Each week, we explore the deep mysteries of the feminine and help listeners apply them to their daily lives in a practical way. Join us to unlock the hidden wisdoms your soul has been waiting for. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Feminine Alchemy. I'm one of your hosts, Jaye, and we've got Kaylee Rose here. Say hi.
Hello, everyone.
Julie is having internet issues, sadly, so she will not be joining us today, but there's always good, important stuff to talk about, and today we're going to really do a deep dive into the grief process, which we've said we could talk about for days, but I think this is going to be a good little intro to how to handle grief, what grief is, and sneaky ways that grief might affect your life that you don't even know. Speaking from personal experience. Every time somebody thinks of grief, and we're getting better at this, but the societal sore thumb of grief is, oh, I lost a person died. And there's so much more to it than that. And that's what I think I really want to talk about, because there's just so much. Anyways, that's my intro rant.
I love it.
So, Kaylee, what are some initial thoughts that you want to share about grief? You being a somatic practitioner, I imagine you see grief more than anything else. And so I'd love to hear about that too. So, in your practice, Kaylee, how do you see grief?
That's a really interesting question. And when you first asked it, I was like, I don't actually see much grief. And then I realized, no, wait. Actually, grief shows up, I think, in really unexpected ways for people because of something that you've already touched on a little bit, in that people think it needs to look a certain way to count as grief. And when people have grief living in their body, but they're not necessarily acknowledging it with their mind because that shouldn't count as something to grieve over, from their own judgment of that or what society has told them grief is supposed to look like, it can really feel like, okay, I'm just going to be really real. Today, I am feeling grief in my body that I'm like, why is my brain is wondering why? Why are you feeling grief, Kaylee? Come on, so many cool things are happening in your life right now. But it feels, there's this heaviness. I told Jan before we started recording, for those of you listening now, I just feel flat and meh. And that is definitely a way that grief can show up, especially if we're not engaging with the grief, if we're just kind of trying to function through it. And what I see sometimes in other people is grief getting dressed up with other emotions, clothing. So people will be acting the rage or the anger. They'll be acting the happiness. They'll be acting the irritation. They'll have the appearance of one thing, but really underneath it is actually grief. There is some, not for everybody, but there's definitely this felt experience of tightening in the chest or in the belly, and kind of almost this sense of your lungs are just not doing what they need and want to be doing. There's almost this restriction of breathing that can be super, super subtle. And so people don't always notice it, but the lungs and the lung meridians, they're connected to grief and to grieving. And even looking back at my training in breath work, there's a certain type of breath that mimics the kind of like shuddering of a child when they've been crying really hard. And that is a way that people will use breath work to actually bring up and process grief. So I don't know if I actually answered your question, but now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, wait, did I answer that question?
You did. You see a lot of grief. Yeah. And you're like, I didn't see any grief, but I did see some grief. And that's exactly what we're talking about, is
Yes.
we're all doing this. And it was so funny that you just straight up went, I don't see a lot of grief, but I actually see a lot of grief.
Uh-huh.
And they do show up in different ways. One of the most profound transformations I experienced involved in almost exclusively processing a lot of grief that I thought was resentment and anger. And if you follow Chinese medicine, unprocessed grief gets kind of malformed into anger, and it's not real anger. But if you don't process even that part of it, then it turns into resentment, because resentment is stored anger. And anger is just, I think it's so like poetic too, because the liver processes anger and the gallbladder processes resentment, and the liver makes bile and the gallbladder stores it, and stored anger is resentment. I just think that's so funny, first of all. But
it's so perfect.
It's so perfect. But when you don't have that processed grief, if your body is experiencing the grief, but you're ignoring it because you're like, oh, that's not what grief is supposed to look like, or I shouldn't be grieving this thing, then it turns into something else that just loops on itself, and the anger never goes away, and the resentment never goes away. And underneath that resentment, underneath the anger, is often just plain grief. And that is like one of my weird little soapboxes, is if we all just worked with grief, we would solve so many problems in our lives. So many problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I don't remember if I've said this before on this podcast, but it's something that I say relatively frequently. And that's that grief is like this untapped resource, especially for men, but also for women, in that there are so many men out there that just seem so angry. They're not angry. They're not letting themselves grieve, because society is slightly more accepting of their anger than of their grief. And I think it used to be a little more acceptable for women to grieve and not acceptable for them to show anger, but something has shifted, and now it's like women's grief as well is getting like kind of shoved into the box, into the shadow. And so it feels really important to me for everybody to make peace with their grief, to make peace with the fact that it's not comfortable, and it's not supposed to be comfortable. It's also not supposed to be somewhere you have to live all the time. So if we can meet our grief with curiosity and compassion, or at the very least with neutrality, to just be able to look at it and allow it to exist without trying to immediately, quote unquote, solve it, fix it, make it go away, heal it, turn it into gratitude and love and light. Like, just in the nitty gritty of the fact that to be alive means that you will experience grief. To love means that you will grieve. They are inseparable. And I think our society has tried so hard for so long to sever that, to cut something that cannot be cut. And it gets really distorted.
Yeah. So let's talk about the 5 stages of grief a little bit. Let's say what they are and why they're important. And then, of course, we'll do a nuanced take on it, because we've always got that, right? So the 5 stages of grief, what's the first one?
I'm trying to remember. It's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And in my own experience and in observing other people, it's not always linear. In fact, usually it's not. You can float around between those, you can cycle through them, and they're not necessarily always in order. There's kind of an order to them, but it's not like this hard and fast, like it always progresses in this way. And if your grief is not progressing in this way, you're doing grief wrong. No, that's a bunch of baloney.
I agree with that. Denial, then anger, sadness, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance, right?
I think for me with grief, I think I don't get stuck on the denial, which is funny, but I do. And then I kind of vacillate between the anger and the bargaining, and then I'll shift into depression for a bit and then back to bargaining and then back to anger. My like recent experiences with having extensive blood clots and being hospitalized and like my life being very different from the way it was last fall to now because of all of that, I have been in this like the stages of grief for almost a year solid for one event, but there also have been other griefs that have come up, not just around that, but around my identity, around different things. And so what I'm trying to illustrate with that is that grief can be really multifaceted and really complex. And at the same time, its core is simple. You have experienced some form of loss or shift. And even sometimes the changes that you are grateful for, like say you got a new house and you've wanted a new house for however many years, there can still be some grief to getting the thing that you want.
Yeah. What does bargaining look like for you? Because I think that's the one that is hard to make sense of.
Okay, so for me, we're going to look at, I guess, the parts of me that I don't always like to talk about because there's a part of me that's embarrassed by them. And that's that I will throw temper tantrums at God, at the universe. I will resist and resist and resist whatever it is that's happening and get really, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like there's some part of my brain, my psyche that thinks if I resist this hard enough, if I throw enough of a tantrum, if I get upset enough, somehow this will not be reality anymore. If I just push it away as hard as I can. And what that can look like is getting really like irritable and short with the people closest to me in my life, especially when they bring up something related to the thing that I'm grieving or the thing that I wish wasn't. And it can also look like kind of this ramping up of anxiety, of this like frenetic energy in my body that's like almost this spinning, this internal spinning of like, I have all this energy that has nowhere to go because I'm trying to use it to do something that's impossible. I'm trying to use it to make reality not reality. And because that is not possible, it's like I'm trying to break the laws of the universe, but instead I'm starting to break myself against them because that's the only thing that can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Those were the two big pieces I was thinking about too. My bargaining isn't like, okay, if you do this, God, then I will do that and everything will be fine. And I think that's like what I thought bargaining was. My bargaining is like, oh, I'm just going to pivot and here's how I'm going to do that. And I like have this elaborate thought process around this. And then I try to think it into a different life, into a different thing, either to prevent it from happening again or to try to rewrite something that already happened. And then all of that sort of will come to a head, and that's when I will have the screaming at God moment. And it's very cathartic. Not gonna lie, I feel much better after that, and I'm like, oh, everything's fine now. So this is good because I think that's the one that no one's really talking about. Is like, what does bargaining look like? I can all kind of go, okay, I know what denial is. I know what anger looks like. Why would I try to make a deal with nothing to fix something that isn't going to change? And that is what it looks like for me is, yeah, that nondescript anxiety, the overthinking. And then, yeah, when I finally have like a big temper tantrum, then I stop overthinking that. So scream at nothing more often. And I will say, in a lot of indigenous societies, European and indigenous cultures included, there is a vocal requirement. There is a vocal piece. The Celtics call it keening. And when you express vocally in such a primal way, there's so much of that emotion that just leaves your body. One thing I thought was really interesting too, coming back to the why don't we process grief very well, there is a stigma against keening now, right? Especially 100 years ago. it was really bad. So it's like, oh no, our society doesn't do that anymore. Because so there was somebody who was talking about current day keening and the Celtic culture and all this, and there were a lot of people who were Irish in Ireland commenting on this, saying we don't do that anymore. That is out of our culture, because it's so intentionally removed by the power over concept, right? That is one thing that is intentionally removed, is you can't express grief this way. This is uncivilized.
We're supposed to grieve quietly and politely and behind closed doors if it's going to get messy or make other people uncomfortable.
Must be civilized. No loud noises from your mouth. Give birth quietly.
Yeah, give birth quietly, grieve quietly, die quietly. Everything must be quiet.
Don't insult me with your auditory sounds. Anyways.
Yeah. I mean, even like have sex quietly, like everything. We must be silent. It's like that movie that, is it The Quiet Place? Is that what it's called? Where like if you made noise, the aliens would come and eat you. But honestly, in some ways, that movie is like the reality that we're all living in that it's like everything has to be modulated because we don't want to make anybody too uncomfortable. And if you're keening, people are going to think you're losing your mind. Or they're going to be really uncomfortable because there is going to be the grief that's still inside them that recognizes that primal feeling, that sound, and it makes it harder for them to ignore the grief that they have not processed.
What are some surprising things that you hadn't processed the grief around that you were like, I didn't think this was a thing. Why would I have grief about this for so many years? What's one thing? Maybe a silly one.
I'm trying to think. I know there have been multiple things over the years that I was like, wow, I did not think that I would grieve that. But like the thing that keeps popping into my head right now is like very prominent in my life at the moment. And it isn't one that I feel like is illogical. It's not something that's like, oh, why would you grieve that? But it's what is alive in this moment. So I'll talk about it and I'll try to remember something that fits for your question better. But just the idea that I have had children. I have 7 of them. It's like watching them grow up. There's so much love and there's so much grief. Little daily griefs where like I'll look at my now 13-year-old and it will hit me like, oh my gosh, 2 years ago, she looked completely different. She behaved different in a lot of ways. And I still see the little girl in her, but she's becoming more of a young woman. And the grief that is in that of like, oh wow, that tiny baby is now this. And I can't ever get that back. And that grief could be consuming and I could hold her back because of it. But like the grief is supposed to be there and it's not supposed to stop the process of life happening. I can grieve that my little girl is not my little tiny girl anymore and be really excited for her to learn and grow and develop because that's what she's here to do. And when I hold my actual baby, my almost 10-month-old, recognizing he's going to be my last, like we're done. And everything that I experience with him is potentially the last of that experience. There's been so much grief around that, but not this like really big, all-consuming grief, but just these tiny little griefs, these tiny little deaths. Like when he started getting his first tooth, it was like, oh, I no longer will see gummy smiles from babies that are mine, that I gave birth to. The gummy smiles are gone. And grieving that, but also like honoring my own experience, but also not taking my experience and then trying to control his experience of developing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, this is great. It's beautiful. So true. But and that's the kind of thing that happens throughout all of life, because like you said before, every change requires a death and a birth. Right? Whether it's not just about the death of people, like what you said, is when you get a new house, You have to grieve that you're no longer in that house that like held you during specific times, that house that even though that one cabinet always bothered you, it was still, thinking of the Newell post on Christmas Vacation. It's always wobbly, and that makes him angry. That whole kind of thing, you're like, yes, I'm going to be done with this, but also I'm no longer going to have this. And this chapter of life is closed. I will no longer be able to walk around this particular neighborhood. These people will no longer be my neighbor. Like those kinds of things are all part of that moving forward into that next step. And I think it's just a really clear example of how this idea of anything staying the same is all an illusion that we generate and create for ourselves. So then when we do have a big change, you can't deny that things are changing. You can't just say, oh, no, it's just another day. We're just staying afloat or just keeping things the same. It's not. There's no artificial kind of going, oh, marginally everything's the same. It's this clear shift, this clear moving on, next chapter energetic that I think we need to sit with the sadness and the grief of the loss of whatever it is as we're moving on. And an example of that I had is when I got this job, I thankfully had about 6 weeks from the time I knew I was getting it until the time I actually had to start working. And so I spent a lot of time grieving free time, grieving my day-to-day, the way it was structured, grieving my flexibility. But I was gaining something very good, and I had to grieve the thing I was losing, which I cherished. Not having to be required anything that required of me except what I committed to.
Well, and this whole conversation just makes me think of Ceres, the asteroid goddess in an astrological chart, but also the mythology and like Persephone and Hades and like that whole arc of that story of like grief and denial of grief because Jupiter or Zeus basically denied Demeter or Ceres her grief, but she also grieved big. And some of that, it mirrors this idea of like, you're trying to keep it the same. And so you're going to grieve big to try to keep it the same. And at the same time, if you accept that it's going to change, you don't want to deny your grief because grief is part of that process. This acceptance of the things that we create, the things that we love, the experiences that we have enjoyed, and ourselves as well. They're going to shift. They're going to have a seasonality. They're going to have moments where it seems like the most terrible thing ever has happened, and then somehow something beautiful can come out of it. And then we're going to have those times where it's like, wow, that really just sucked. And I want to find something good in it, but like, I'm not seeing it. And being okay with that and not shaming yourself for not being able to see the silver lining, because pushing it, trying to force that is what causes the problem, not being able to see the silver lining. Hi, it's Kaylee. If you've been listening to this show for a while, you already know about the feminine power line. Black Moon Lilith, the Eve point, that axis in your chart that holds both the exiled feminine and the desiring feminine. You know the words. But there's a difference between knowing the words and actually turning the light on. The Feminine Powerline self-paced course is where that happens. It's not a lecture. It's an experience. Guided journeys, somatic reflections, and a full reference library of interpretations for your exact placements, so you can sit with your own chart and actually feel what's been living there. Feel it and reclaim it. Women who've gone through the course say the same thing. I didn't expect it to hit that deep. The first 25 students get founding student pricing at $97. After that, it's $147. You can find the link to check it out and to purchase in the show notes of this episode. If the feminine power line has been calling you, this is where you answer.
Yeah. And I think that even the silver lining conversation is part of the bargaining process. And that's also where people get stuck is, oh, it's fine because I've got this now and I'm going to do this. but just sitting with the discomfort of this is hard. One thing that I found in childhood that I think will help highlight things, because I think a lot of people go, again, grief is about big stuff, it's not about small stuff. But when you have a lot of those little unprocessed grief nuggets, they add up to a lot of stress in your life, even if they're running under the surface. And I'll give you a silly example. When I was 5, I was homeschooled. We did homeschool kindergarten, and my mom also watched this other boy. So there were 2 of us doing this homeschool program. And I had this really awesome pink pencil, and you could erase it. Colored pencils weren't usually erasable, right? And it was called Color Race, which I thought was just the most hilarious thing.
Color Race.
What a pun. And I would draw little pictures of this pencil while using this pencil, so it was in the color, and then I could erase it. And I just thought it was the funniest thing. And this boy turns to me one day, and he's like, "I bet you I could break your pencil." And I was like, really confused. He's like, "Hold your pencil like this. Hold my pencil." And then he flicked his pencil at it, and it didn't do anything. He flicked it again, and it didn't do anything. And he was just so annoyed by it. He grabbed my pencil and broke it in half. I was like so upset about this, so upset. And my mom told him that he had to get me a new one. So I was like, okay, at least I'll get a new one. But then I guess a couple of days later, I screamed in his ear, and then she said, "Oh, that deal is off. You no longer get a new pencil." Because I was like mad at him for something. Yeah. So I never got this pencil. And 20 years later, that little piece of grief lived inside my body, and a practitioner found it in my adrenal gland. And I was like, oh yeah, this whole story, blah, blah, blah. Once I finished processing that grief, because we have tools, and it was so old, it didn't take me that long. It was like a 10-minute process. I took a 6-hour nap, and then I slept a full night. And the next day, I was like, everything's fine. And I had way less stress about life. I think partially it was because it was on my adrenals. And so it was literally just like always triggering my adrenals directly. But it changed everything. And then after that, I was like, I can change my food. No problem. I can do this. No problem. When previously there would always be this sort of invisible wall against these things. Unprocessed grief, man, really gets in your way. Really gets in your way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be, I had childhood trauma and it was really, really bad. I had a little boy broke my pencil and I was still mad about it 20 years later.
Because it was an awesome pencil.
It was so cool.
I love that you brought up like that you slept, because I think there's a lot of symbolism in that. So in 2020, both of my grandpas died, neither of them from COVID. And I remember sleeping so much, and like my various family members sleeping so much after that happened. And I was like, what is going on? Why are we all so tired? And then one day it just hit me like, oh, like we're processing grief. Like we're not, because you could sleep to like avoid your grief. That's totally a thing. But we were processing it through sleep. And in a lot of ways, every night when you go to sleep, it's kind of like this little death. And I don't mean that in like a scary, dramatic way to make people afraid to go to sleep. What I mean by that is that you go from like the solar conscious world into the lunar unconscious world. And that becomes your reality. You're not doing anything, and yet your body is still doing things. And it is this place of like rejuvenation, of repair, of your body restocking things. And it does it emotionally too. And dreams are processing, and there's so much that happens underground, so to speak. And it's very similar to like the concept of winter, and winter being this preparation for spring, and even like death. That death is this, like, so many things are going underground to be ultimately processed into something new. And we have that symbolic thing that happens every night. But in our culture, we're so focused on productivity that we start cutting out our sleep, and then our bodies start malfunctioning, and when we're grieving, sometimes it's almost like our bodies are like, hey, guess what? We have so much that we need to process right now. We have so much that needs to be witnessed, and you're not doing it while you're awake. So you're going to do it while you're sleeping. So guess what? You're tired. You're sleeping now. And not from like a malicious place. Our bodies are not trying to punish us. It's more like, hey, you're not listening to me. So I'm not going to give you a choice anymore.
Yes. So I had a sleep course. I still have it. I just don't really talk about it much. That entire course was based on let's complete some grief processing and you'll probably sleep better. Because like I said before, unprocessed grief goes from the lung into the liver, and the liver's time and the gallbladder's time and the lungs time are all in the middle of the night. So if you're not sleeping well and you have extra inflammation, usually it's related to grief, or at least there's a grief piece at a minimum. So yes, you're right. But the other thing is when we sleep, like you said, we're integrating a lot. We're using dreams. Neurologically, that's the time you're going to do any kind of pruning and rewiring of the brain in the first place. So when you're processing grief, like from a synapse standpoint, you're making new brain connections. That's the whole reason why grief is so terrifying, is because it's like, I don't know what's on the other side of this. And the same thing is true, I think, when people are learning something new and they hate it, because there's a gap between the synapses. Not like, oh, we've already got these synapses here and they just need to be connected. Sometimes it's that simple, but sometimes you have to make whole new loops of this is how I process life and this is how I behave in life now. And grief is going to really supercharge that. But if you don't let it do its thing, then you're going to get stuck in these loops of I have to behave this way, and you're going to be a lot more amped up about absolutely nothing. Let that sleep happen. You let that go. You go through those pruning and rewiring processes, and it's a big difference. And that's when you kind of wake up one day and go, everything's fine now. Okay, I know what to do now. It's not because you figured out the secret code. It's because your brain finally was strengthened the right connections that will work for you. When previously you had something that worked for you, and now it's no longer there. And I have to figure out how to live without that thing. How do I I have to rewire my brain to function. So that's what sleep is for, I think.
I agree.
Yeah. I always see unprocessed grief as like open tabs. And because when we're stuck on the thing where it's like, this thing is no longer here, I need to interact with it. Or this thing was here and that's how I interacted, and now I have to close down that tab. How do you do that, Kaylee?
How do you close down the tab?
How do you close down tabs?
Well, I don't know. This probably sounds very counterintuitive, but not trying to close down the tabs, if that makes sense. Like focusing on, oh, I just need to grieve this. I just need to get over this. Oh, I just need to process this. Because that's another form of trying to fix it instead of being in it. Because like we're so uncomfortable with being in the middle of things, or being in the liminal space, the in between, the place where it's like there's the void going on. I don't know quite what's going to happen, that we try to get out of it. And we think that's going to close the tabs. But the reality is that to close the tabs, you need to be in the grief. You need to be in the quote unquote mess. You need to be in the void and allow it to exist and feel how it feels in your body. I mean, I think sometimes we don't do that because we're terrified. Like, oh my gosh, if I actually feel this, am I going to fall apart? If I actually feel this, will I spiral into depression and be completely dysfunctional and not be able to work and not be able to take care of my children, and I'll lose my house and blah, 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 and like go down these spirals of why you can't feel the thing. And I want to acknowledge that and honor that if somebody has concerns about their grief and feeling it, there's a reason that they have concerns. And at the same time, there's a way to feel what you're feeling without it completely overwhelming your system. And that's by going to what I sometimes call the tender edge, Like, go to the edge of the comfort. Go to the edge of the comfort zone. Go to where it starts to feel like, oh man, I'm encountering this grief. And be there first. Be in that tender space. Be on the edge of that. And as you begin to recognize, like, oh, I can actually be in that space and not fall apart, then that expands and the tender edge is further out. And now you move into that space. And you keep doing that until you get to a place where it's like, oh, wow, this is intense. Like, this grief is very real. And I'm okay. It's okay that I'm not okay. As contradictory as that sounds, you cannot be okay and be okay at the same time. And I think that is how you close those tabs, is witnessing your own, not just witnessing your own grief, but being in it instead of looking at it from the outside.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think sometimes when people learn about the stages of grief, they try to force themselves through it and say, okay, I'm in denial, but I really should just be angry. So let's get started being angry. I need to stop being angry and let me start barking. Like, there's no processing when you're just overthinking it. And to the point where I think even sometimes external parties might say, oh, well, you're stuck in being angry. So you should just stop being angry and start accepting it. Like, let's just all skip to acceptance. Let's just go. Let's skip to the end, which that might be true for some grief, but most of it, you got to go through all of it, right? Like, I find a lot of tales in my life, right? A lot of grief tales, and I will do like a mass clearing every so often when I'll get to that tender edge, and I'll go, okay, anything else that let's just accept all of the things that I have like open tabs on that are ready for acceptance. Let's just do that all at once. Boom. You know? But you're right, that tender edge, like, you have to feel it. You can't just like think it. There is a body feeling that has to happen before you can even consider closing the tab by saying, okay, I accept this. I accept this. I accept this. I'm good now. But sometimes I will do like a mass, like, okay, anything that I just is ready to be accepted that I have not hit the button on, let me go do that. And then other things will just take longer, and that's okay. But you'll find that just like going through old tabs, you're like, I don't need this anymore. I solved this problem. I just haven't exited it yet. Sometimes those things can even trip us up, and we just need to do that part. And then there's something else that surprises people a lot. I think that sometimes we have a big thing that happens, and it's so big that we have to remember it is many pieces of lots of little things at once. So when I had a friend who was going through divorce, it was grief, grief, grief around just the whole thing. And then it turned into, I'm done grieving the person, but now I want to grieve the marriage, the fact like of being married. And then it was, okay, I'm good with that, but I'm just grieving, what does it look like for me now as like a person, and putting my old life behind. But there were so many facets that might come up. And that's why I think people say, oh, grief comes in waves. Yeah, because you've got so many pieces. When you have big stuff going on, you've got so many little threads that need your attention. It's not just like one and done. Let me sledgehammer through this and I'm going to fix all of it at once. There are pieces that come through that are different, but they're all connected to whatever this previous life was.
Mm-hmm.
Are you experiencing any of that?
Yeah. No, I have seen that repeatedly in my life, where it's like something big shifts in my life, or even something big shifts in the life of somebody that I care about. And it's like, oh, I'm grieving the thing that ended. I'm grieving what changes in me because of that. I'm grieving what changes in them because of that. I'm grieving what's changing in the relationship because of that. I'm grieving the experiences that I thought I would have that now I probably won't have. I'm grieving the experiences that I had that I probably won't have again. It's just, there's a lot. There are so many layers. I think at any point in the grieving process with any quote unquote size of grief, whether it's something small or something monumental, that where we really get into trouble is when we judge ourselves for what we're experiencing, when we say it's bad or wrong, instead of just looking at it and saying, this is what it is. Because even I think people get afraid of staying stuck in grief. I get afraid of staying stuck in grief. You can't get stuck in grief. Not really, if you're just allowing it to exist, because the process will run. The emotions will move through and they'll process in your body. If you're not using shame and should be and shouldn't be to try to modulate things, it will process and you will release it and you will not get stuck in it and it will not get stuck in you. I mean, it's easier said than done sometimes to just be with whatever it is and to allow it to process and to not be afraid of like, am I just going to be struggling to get out of bed forever? Am I going to stay in this depressed state forever? Is this just who I am now? No. But you also can't rush it and you don't need to put a timeline on it that is imposed by somebody or something outside of yourself, like your job gives you a week to grieve the loss of your husband or your parent, and then you should be back to work. We get these messages externally all the time about the timeline for grief and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And granted, there are parameters that we have to work within. And at the same time, nobody gets to tell you when your grief is over or what it's supposed to look like in the process of grieving.
So important. Let's make it actionable. What are some ways that people can process their grief today, no matter what stage they're in?
Well, I tend to go back to journaling, and a type of journaling that's basically free writing. Just like write whatever comes out. Just let it come out however it comes out and without editing or judgment. But then also, it may sound a little trite, but like cry. Just let yourself cry. And I know there are going to be people who are like, I try and I can't cry, because I live with people who struggle to cry because of a lot of conditioning. And okay, be okay with that. Recognize in that moment, be like, it would be really nice if I could just cry right now. If I could just do something. And if you can't cry, yell, scream, vocalize in some fashion to help get things started. You can just set the intention of like, I am going to sing this song. I'm going to have a karaoke moment and sing this song. And I'm setting the intention that that's going to help start this process of grieving. And you can pick an emotional song. You could pick happy birthday. Like you could pick anything. I mean, it'll help if it's something that brings up emotion, but the intention and the movement and the sound, the choosing in is really important, and it will start the process for you. And another one that may sound a little odd is go get some body work done. Go get a massage. Go get a chiropractic adjustment. Have somebody put hands on your body in a safe way with your consent, where you feel another human being touching you and it's safe. Because the number of physical therapists, chiropractors, massage therapists that I have talked to are like, yeah, people cry on my table all the time. And like, it's a thing. And it's part of how we grieve. Go hug somebody who's okay with you hugging them, obviously. But like, go have physical contact. And if you can't do any of those things for whatever reason, hug yourself. Feel your own hands on your own arms, on your own face. Anything that provides that warmth and that contact that's so instinctive and so primal for us, it can help you tap into that grief and to process it. Do you want to add to that, Jan?
I love this. Yes. I want to echo any kind of lung stuff, right? Crying, like you said, you can mimic those sobbing noises regardless of whether you feel like you can actually cry is good. And you know, it's something that people don't think about that does mimic that sobbing noises that we don't hate is laughter. And when you laugh so hard, you get tears, you have that heaving sound. That is very similar to sobbing, but it's for a different reason. And sometimes just laughing a lot can create that lung movement that you need in the same sort of patterning. And that might be the answer.
I love that you brought that up. Sorry to interrupt you, but I can't believe I didn't think of this because my husband will call it craffing because my whole life I'll be like under stress or under whatever, like experiencing a lot of things and not necessarily realize it. And then I'll start laughing over the most ridiculous thing and I'll start laughing hysterically. And then it will turn into outright sobbing. And then it's like my entire being resets. So sometimes my husband will intentionally try when he knows, like, okay, stuff is built up. He will try to get me to laugh so hard that I sob because he knows it will reset me. And so that's just me, like, providing some personal experience, like, to back up what Jayan just said. Yes, go laugh. Go laugh. Pretend to laugh. It really does work. So go ahead, Jayan. I apologize for the interruption.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, I'm not one for those like laughter retreats or those crying retreats, but doing the things are important. It's so wonderful. Like it oxygenates your blood because you're bringing in more air than you're getting rid of. It also will reset your vagus nerve because you're triggering all of those same like vocal pieces. There's just like so much good for both laughing and sobbing that are super similar. You're like, I can't cry and I don't like crying and I want to try laughing. Singing is wonderful. Yes. Singing, singing long and loudly will do the same thing as wailing, right? But it's socially acceptable and anything's acceptable in your car. So
Yeah, I was just going to say, go sing in your car, go for a drive, sing in your car. If you feel like crying and or screaming while also singing, like, that's totally acceptable.
yeah.
No one's going to mind. And if they did, that's their problem.
I also like the idea of feeling into that tender edge you mentioned because that is the piece, right? Let's not jump into the middle where we feel like we're having a whole adrenaline reaction. Let's walk it close to the edge and then just take an inventory. What are the reasons why this piece is hurting and write it down? And then you can start to see, okay, what do I need to do? Where am I with each one of those pieces? What do I need to do and experience in order to actually move forward with this piece? How about this piece? How about this piece? Is there more? Sometimes just naming the thing makes it all better. Sometimes that's the problem. You just don't even know what it is. I'm crying and I don't know why. Like, yeah, that's common because we aren't accustomed to naming the source of this pain as, we're accustomed to naming the stuff in front of us. It's a little more elusive. Yeah. What is one thing that you feel like people should know about grief before we sign off?
Well, the one thing that's kind of been eating at me a little bit during probably the last half of this conversation is just this thought of like, okay, if I were to today to experience a big grief, like something truly devastating for me, like say the loss of my husband or one of my children, how would this episode land for me? And realizing that, like, when you're in the middle of something like that, everything that we just said could probably feel a little unfeeling. And I want to acknowledge and honor anybody who's in the space of like, this is so real and this is so raw for me. And you guys are just full of it because you're not in grief right now. You don't know what you're talking about. It's okay for you to think that. And it's okay for you to feel that. Because when you are in a lot of grief, it's a lot. Grief is not comfortable. It can be incredibly painful. It can be incredibly visceral. It can feel like you are being torn to shreds. And I just want to hold space for that reality and the fact that there is nothing that is going to mend that or fix that for you. And that's not what we're trying to do here. All we're trying to do here is, one, extend permission that you don't need from us, but sometimes we need to hear it from another person. Permission to let your experience be your experience, and also some tools for helping you recognize your grief when there are things you're grieving that other people might say are not grief, are not something that would be, or you may be saying it's not something that you should be grieving about. Just a lot of acceptance of it being okay for you to experience what you experience, and it being okay for you to not be okay with it, to not like it. We're not asking you to like it. I'm inviting you to sit with it and let it exist, even though it feels awful when you're right in the middle of it.
Yes. If you are in the middle of it, we were talking about most people who are, I'm fine, I'm good. If you're in the middle of this, a real experience, your most important thing is to triage. And if that means taking time out of your day and doing nothing, that's okay. If that means not thinking about it or thinking about it too much, that's also okay. Most of the time, people who are in it aren't worried about what if I have secret grief that I didn't know is messing with my life. In that type of situation, you know where it is. And it feels all encompassing and overwhelming and like drowning in nothing. It's very strange. And in those moments, it pure gentleness, triage, allowing, and just making sure that, first of all, your responsibilities are in a safe place so you can continue to process that. Because again, like Kaylee said before, when we have big grief moments, life still goes on. It's really hard. That's really hard. You still have to have the day-to-day stuff and deal with probably in really, really tough grief situations, you might even have more responsibilities than you had before the thing happened. It's so scary, so terrifying, and it's so hard to go, I need to make the right decision, and I can't because my brain isn't working the way I'm used to. So hold space for that. Hold space for yourself. Be kind to yourself. This is not the time to embark on a new journey. This is not the time to start a new project. It's the time to sit with this thing in your spare time and create support systems around you the best you can, where if you needed to delegate some responsibilities, you can do that so you can have that space. Triage. Yeah, thank you for saying that, because you're right. We were very waxing on like lots of little griefs or old griefs, but the big ones, if you're in the midst of it, all those ideas seem so dumb, so trite.
Yes.
Well, if you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star review, and we are so looking forward to seeing you next week. Have a great one, everybody.